So one of the things that we've touched upon with some of the other guests that were here today is retrofits, and something that I know you are particularly expert in is LEED certification and the kind of documentation that's required to ensure that a building has fulfilled its design requirements under LEED. So I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about your role in that particular process.
Sure. So we are often hired by the building developer, so the condo developer, to guide them essentially through the green building certification process. The most common tool that they use is LEED. So LEED is the go-to standard for green building certification. The system that LEED has developed is a set of points that you can pursue, which maybe some points make more sense for one property versus another. Some are arguably are cheaper to implement than others. And so we guide them through setting that design of their achievement of sustainability for the project. And then we work through the design process. We review the designer's drawings. We coordinate with the building designer for any of the credits within LEED that relate to operations. We make sure that they are putting in place the policies that they would need. And then during construction, we review construction submittals, and we also do support commissioning of the HVAC and lighting systems, especially in the facility. And then at the end, we help to submit and work with the Canadian Green Building Council, who certifies LEED construction, to ensure that the building meets the certification and achieves the level, silver, gold, platinum level that they are hoping to get.
One of the things that we touched upon in condominiums, it's not common for an existing building to pursue a LEED designation.
Yeah.
And you talked about most often the LEED designation being the go-to in condominiums. And we also talked about the fact that the reason the LEED certification is the one that is the go-to is because it's a recognized standard, because it's something that people see and hear and want to participate in.
Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons, probably the most important reason historically, that people want a green building certification is to show that they have acted sustainably in the design, construction, or operation of their building. And I think that condo builders have a good reason to pick LEED as a standard, because people have heard about LEED, they know it represents, it's emblematic of sustainability. So they choose LEED because that's what people know. One
of the principles in ensuring that a building is meeting the design specifications you spoke of as being the commissioning process.
Yeah.
And talk to me a little bit about the commissioning process under LEED, because it's a little bit different from a standard commissioning process.
Yeah, so it's a third-party verified commissioning process. I think the simplest way to describe commissioning is make the equipment or system that you're building work the way that it was intended to work.
So that would be the
simplest way of describing
the major
it. So
mechanical system for cooling the building and heating the building.
Heating, ventilation, those are the three key services that the commissioning team would analyze. But it's also the lighting systems can be commissioned. Are they working properly? The enclosure of the building can be commissioned. The building envelope is commissioned. And so I think that, and so what commissioning does is it takes the designer's intent, and the third-party commissioning agent oversees the work of the contractor to make sure that they have achieved the performance expectation of that system. And commissioning does extend into usually it's the first year, and typically around 13, 14 months, there's a commissioning, they come back and check to make sure everything's working, and they'll issue that final commissioning report. And that actually is meant to be a milestone and a handoff between the builder and the operator of the building. It's the commissioning agent's job through the LEED certified third-party commissioning agent to hand off the operation of the building in some ways between the contractor and the operator. So that's a crucial link, right?
Yes.
Like you really want someone to be thinking about you independently of any contract disputes, any issues related to quality of workmanship. That's that third-party verified commissioning benefit.
And we talked about the fact that in that handoff, there's then a training component, so that the person who is going to be assuming the role of operating the building, and in condominiums, it's not always, really an operator, not like the full facilities plant of a giant university. It's smaller in scale, but you're still reviewing all of the points in that system to ensure that it's operating as it was intended.
Yeah, that's right. And I know our commissioning agents work very hard because of the fact that the operations team isn't always isn't as well staffed, et cetera, or maybe doesn't have the same amount of time available as in other facilities. They want to make sure that they pass that information off. So it's a review of all the systems, the key points of operation. I think it's going through, if there's a building automation system especially, it's going through that with the operator, making sure they understand, how to verify things. And in a few rare buildings, it's also reviewing the energy performance of the building to date. That's not as common because, actually, to be honest, it's because the builder doesn't always care that much about how well the building performs afterwards, right? So that there's that divide between the two, the owner occupant and the builder.
It's interesting because we talked about a recommissioning process as perhaps being one of the best spends that a building can pursue in order to get the most out of the system that they have existing without doing a lot of replacement or retrofit.
Yeah, and I think, so if you can think about it, just imagine a fresh building, completely well commissioned, and the operator is handed that manual, and now it's that person's job to make sure the building continues to operate the way that it's supposed to. If that operator leaves, if the manual gets lost, if no one spends time focusing on that, and then there's a complaint, and then something gets changed, something gets set to constant flow. Right. And then someone else
I smell something in the corridor, and so then we
better turn the ventilation
on way more air
in
order to just blow it out of the building.
All sorts of these simple changes get made to the operation system, in part, there's two reasons. One, in response to what is the immediate issue, which is someone's complaining, but also in part because of a lack of understanding of how the systems operate. So hopefully a well-commissioned building has passed off that kind of knowledge.
The other tool that we had talked about through LEED was education of the people who are occupying the building, and being able to convey the message of sustainability and conservancy to all of the users in a building. Yeah.
So we tend to work with, so when we do LEED certification, we'll often develop a summary that is useful for the tenants, so where they can understand the systems in the building. There may be some systems in the building that are a little more complex to operate. Maybe the thermostat isn't a normal thermostat. Right. So that kind of basic training. And I think that if where people are really interested in knowing, they'll seek that out. But if no one's really put together a useful document or a useful way of explaining the green features of the building, then it's not as easily for the management team to provide that. So that's one of those important things that can come from LEED certification.
And we talked about some of this information being really basic in nature in some ways, right? Yeah. And there's that old adage, what is measured can be managed. Yes. And you talked about the value in some circumstances of being able to see the real change that is made by your own behavior and your own activity. Yeah. So you were speaking specifically, a little bit about, for instance, receiving a bill for water or for hydro or things like that. Yeah.
I would say that the most important, so right now we're in an interesting phase in our response to climate change. Yes. So nationally, there's a strong push towards saying, yes, we're signed on to the Paris Agreement. We care about climate change. We really want to act at all levels of government, which is great. So the way that individual people can act is by knowing how much energy they use and taking action to reducing that. And just looking at your bills and saying, okay, well, how much energy am I using? What are things that I can do in my house or in my condo to reduce that? And everyone has, most of the energy use in a condo is driven by the choices of the occupant. Absolutely. So, setting your thermostat, turning off lights and plugs, and green condos, so even especially LEED certified condos, offer more tools to the condo occupant to be able to save energy.
Single off buttons.
Right,
and
exactly.
things like
That, or they call them vacancy switches, where when you leave, it turns off everything for you. So it makes it easier in many cases to do that. So the gap is you need that drive to get you to care about that. You need that process in your life. So seeing your bills of your usage. So a lot of condos are tending now towards installing energy metering for all of the services that are provided to the condo owner. So these are the new ones that we're working with now. So electricity, water, and heating and cooling to the condo is starting to become more commonly installed. So the great thing is that in the future, you'll be able to look at a bill of your energy use and take responsibility for that. And that's great. And the hope is that working with the operator, working in the long term with builders and with education with tenants, we'll be able to see significant improvements.
And it's not only caring about climate change, and it's not only caring about the environment, and it's not only about wanting to act responsibly and sustainably. At the end of the day, there are some dollar drivers. I know that hasn't necessarily been the primary motivator currently, but most budgets would see the utilities of a condominium at about 40% of the total cost, right? And the rate of rise on utilities has historically been substantially higher than the rate of inflation. So the competition factor and the ability to control costs is going to factor in.
The challenge actually, so I'll just quick point out a challenge, and this is something that is important for everyone who's trying to both conserve dollars and carbon, is that the biggest source of carbon emissions in Ontario, for example, is natural gas.
Right.
Our electricity is the biggest source of our energy cost. Electricity use is 5 times or more, and depending on the situation, higher than natural gas. So it actually makes it, sometimes if you don't focus broadly at the way that you use energy, you can't address both problems.
Right.
But that's why you need to sort of take a broad look. How can we implement improvements in our choices and in the technology we have, or through retro-commissioning, that save both gas and electricity, and then you can address both problems. And then I think that's the sweet spot where you can see significant reductions in your bottom line, and also take advantage of incentives that are going to be coming for the government from the climate change side. So
finally, things that seem like small components, but in terms of a resident's everyday experience of their building, things like pesticides and products that are used inside the condominium, the VOCs, the smells that are emitted from new paint, new wallpaper, new carpeting. Is it as simple as a bunch of lists that we can look at and make recommendations to partners about products that would be better for use inside our buildings?
Yeah, and I think that it's actually one of the interesting things about LEED as a tool, and about the green building market in general, is that one thing that worked really well were those lists that were developed, and those I would say criteria that were developed when LEED and other green building standards came out for VOCs and other emissions from products. So now the industry, it's very readily available. Like, what are the kinds of products? What are the standards that you should ask for from your carpeting manufacturer, from the paint manufacturer, from the wood finish manufacturers? Like, all of that it's sort of known in the industry. Well, if you want a green product, you look to those key standards that were developed through by LEED, by the Canadian Green and U.S. Green Building Councils for that process.
The final thing that I'm asking everybody that I've met with is if you could think of one thing that you would tell a property manager that would help them be more successful in the area of sustainability and effective energy use and greening of a building, what would it be?
We're at this point where there's going to be, I think, a strong push to publicly disclose the performance of facilities. And we're just ahead now, very briefly ahead of the time when that's going to become law, essentially.
Right.
So now there's an opportunity for operators to take advantage of incentives and to engage with the boards that they work with and say, hey, this is coming, we're going to have to do it. Now's the time to use what the government is offering in terms of incentives to really put in place a regular, I'll say an ongoing commissioning process for the performance of this building. And measuring, and then asking the question, okay, we've measured, here are the places where we think we can improve, getting estimates for the cost, acting, and then measuring again, that continuous improvement process. A great time to get started right now.
And it means the difference being able to choose your destiny as opposed to being pigeonholed into a certain area,
Or-
right? To be
yeah.
ahead of a reporting curve, which may see your building be less desirable in the marketplace.
Exactly, and
right?
and that's the thing is people will start to ask, well, what is the performance of your building? And if you're being more reactionary and saying, oh well, we just put the numbers together and we're the average, well, that's not going to be as useful a sales pitch for sure.
Right, and you're right, it mayn't be something that's required or of interest to prospective homeowners or folks who are living in a building, but it will be. And the issue is that change is not going to come on a dime, and it might take investment.
Yep.
So this is a great opportunity for us to learn about our building, make sure we know how we can use it most effectively, and plan for the future. So
Yeah.
use the information that we would get through these processes to feed into our reserve fund plans for future.
Yeah, and the long-term planning part is even separate from the immediate sort of the low-hanging fruit we talked about.
Right.
So a robust process of assessment would include not just what can we do now, but what should we plan to do in 10 or 15 years,
Yeah.
for sure. So.
Terrific.
Yeah.
It's been great. Really, really helpful.
Oh, no
Thanks
problem.
a lot.
Thank you very much.